I think we're just going to make a wee start. So I would just like to welcome everyone along to our Women in Ag Greening webinar trilogy. So this is the second meeting as part of our trilogy, and this one is going to be discussing herbal leys and green covers. We've got two speakers along tonight. So our first one is going to be David Fuller from Sweet Hope Farm in Kelso, and then our second speaker is going to be Willie Fleming from Germinal. So I'm just going to pass you over to our first speaker so he can get his presentation up, if that's okay.
I want to just go through really my thoughts on this question, and you could put companion in that title as well. So, and we can call them all sorts of things from that. I'm going to call it a green crop. Okay, a lot of the crops are green anyway, but we're just going to go. I'm going to go through my personal thoughts as an arable farmer with no livestock of my own. Those are more caveats. Looking at what I think about in the process of deciding what to do and what to use for my green cover crops or my green crops. Okay. My thoughts are that a catch crop is between main cash crops designed to capture nutrients and keep them where they are for the following crop. The definition for me of a cover crop is something that's covering the soil to protect the soil, and with a bit of luck is also designed to enhance soil life. And a manure crop would be there to enhance the soil nutrient bank, whether that's organic matter or potentially macronutrients or even micronutrients. And all of these green crops are designed, this is again, remember, this is in my head, are designed to continue harvesting solar radiation and managing soil water. So that's the approach that I take to deciding what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to run through a quick list here of the things which I'm then going to come back to in detail one at a time. So the things that I look at, I'm looking at what I want to achieve out of a cover crop. What am I going to use to achieve that aim? When am I going to establish this crop? Is it going to be an autumn or a spring crop or even a summer crop? How am I going to put this crop in? So we'll come to what that means in a moment. Um, Really, most importantly, I think of all, is can I monetize it? And that, of course, helps to pay the cost of it. What comes next is a question about rotation in particular. And I'll cover that in a bit of detail. What we're going to do to get rid of what we've put in there, or are we going to leave it in place? And the bigger picture, which comes back to the question of monetizing it, is it worth it? So I'm going to pick those off one in turn and see how we get on. So, what do you want to achieve? So for me, I'm looking for a question of, do we want to deal with soil health benefits? Are we capturing nutrients for use in a following crop? And if we look at capturing nutrients, that might also be releasing other nutrients. So things like buckwheat, which will, with its root exudates, actually release phosphate to the following crop is one of the things, a benefit or one of the things I want to achieve out of it. Improving the plant diversity in the soil. So if we're all cereals, I'm not, I have quite a good, it's a 9 course rotation, so I've got quite a broad spectrum of crops. But if you're all, particularly if you're all cereals, this is increasing plant diversity, which in its own right will help with soil health. Extra grazing, and that's, that for an arable farmer, that also has the possibility of getting livestock around the crop fields, and obviously that has its own organic benefits too. Or are you just doing it to tick a box? And as far as I'm concerned, my plan is I'm looking for microbiological benefits, preventing leaching if it's an overwintered crop, or increasing my rotational diversity. So those are all things which I think of, and I'm absolutely not doing it to tick a box. But given that we've got EFA greening changes in Scotland coming up, it's perfectly possible that people will need to consider doing it for tick box exercise. But hopefully, by the end of this, you'll see that there's actually a more benefit to be had from it than that. So if we now just take through the options of what to use. Now, the picture on the right is an environmental scheme. It's an AICS, SIDP AICS scheme in Scotland. It's pretty similar to an HLS scheme in England. And I use this in 12-metre margins around the outside of an oilseed rape crop. And that's sown in May and taken out after harvesting rape in August. And you can see it's got a few oxide daisies in it in a minute, but the purple flowers in the foreground that you can see are Phacelia. It has a huge variety of stuff. You're going to see a little video clip at the end of what it actually looks like. And you can, at the far side of the field, you'll see that there's another bit of it, and it goes right the way around the field. That to me gives us a huge amount of beneficial insect benefit for the following crop. So, are we going to use mixtures like what you see in front of us, or are we going to use straights? And again, that comes back to the question of what you want to achieve. If we've had a lot of shedding at harvest time, actually, do volunteers achieve the same thing? And that's the cheapest form you've got. If they're there, you might as well use them. Do we want to work with flowering plants or edible plants or both? So these are things that you need to consider about, what the end use is going to be. Cheapest, apart from volunteers, is floor sweepings at harvest for an arable farmer, and highly effective at doing providing you with something that could be grazed over the winter, or at the very least provides a living root over the winter. The question of establishing a green crop is about, to me, the principles here are about the timings. Are we looking at doing something which is going to be, if we take stubble turnips in the autumn, for instance, as a green crop, are we looking to graze that later in the winter? In which case we need to be getting it in early, and we need to make a decent job of it. Are we merely looking to tick a box and have something green there, etc.? So to me, the timings, or when we're sowing it, are probably as important as in dictating what to use as anything. And in some cases, like that egg scheme that you saw a picture of just now, it's dictated to by a scheme. So I have to sow that in May. It has to be in the ground for 3 months. We can't take it out before the 15th of August. Those are scheme parameters, so I work with that. But there are also other things which give you the opportunity of putting stuff in the autumn, or in the summer. There's plenty of variation available there. So when are we going to put it in dictates what we use too. The methods, are we going to broadcast it into a standing crop? If we're going to broadcast it into a standing crop, clearly that's pre-harvest for establishment. We could direct drill into it afterwards. We could use a straw rake and do a stubble afterwards. Do we go for a full-blown plough and drill option? If you were looking to put a green cover in for or green crop in for grazing, it might suit to do that. Personally, I'm into either direct drilling or straw rake to try and do my green crop establishment. So I want to just make clear that the timings, given that you've chosen a crop and you've decided when it's going to go in and when it's going to suit you and fit your system to go in, the timings are really critical to success. And I'm going to show you a picture now. And to the left of that green arrow was sown at the end of August, and to the right of that green arrow was sown in the middle of August this year. And the difference is stark. And it's not an easy bit of ground. And it was put in there. I'm going to put somebody's sheep over that in the early spring, January, February time. And then it's in fact going into an AD plant crop. But you can see the difference in the size of the plants and the quality of establishment being a fortnight's difference in sowing. So that's a key point to take away from that. It's about the timing matters a lot, and what you're going to use affects that too. So monetizing it. Um, in order to, sorry, just come back for a second. I should also say that soil moisture and soil temperature make a lot of difference. A lot of the cover or green crop seeds are very small, and they need to be in good conditions, good growthy conditions in order to get away. If they're planted late, you're going to see a late one in a moment, or that they are more chucked on, if you like, the risks are higher for failure. You're setting yourself up for failure. So soil moisture and temperature have a considerable effect on the success of a green crop, and they also, of course, may affect how you do the establishment. And the establishment in this case was identical both sides of that green arrow. If we look at the question of monetizing it, if it's part of a scheme and you're getting paid for it, clearly that's one way that we can look at things. I'm involved in carbon credit trading, and I can actually earn carbon credits for planting green cover crops. And in fact, all of the green crops, whether they're catch, cover, or manure crops, I can earn credits for planting them at the moment, and that more than covers the cost of seed. So carbon trading options is, for me, the best way of monetizing what I put in the ground. But there are other ways. I mean, if it's grazed, it may have a value to you for grazing. It may equally well be able to, as I'm going to with that picture you've just seen, I'll have somebody else's sheep on it. It won't last very long, but they'll be paying for the privilege of having their sheep on there. So I get an income that way. For green crops to be taken up and being really successful, getting as much value out of it as possible is important. And some of that value is not necessarily immediately visible. So there's the long-term benefits, particularly in an arable farm, of having livestock about the place and of being able to rotate that around. There's long-term gains there, which are not immediately obvious. And that may have a bearing on how much you want to spend on seeds, and that'll affect the timing you want to use to sow it. As I've said, if it's part of a scheme, that may well dictate. If it's in Scotland, our EFA figure changes that are coming up, it's not necessarily going to, or it may well make things a lot easier for you if you take the EFA green cover option, and that obviously satisfies the scheme requirements, and that's another option. One that's not in here, but I do need to talk about, is that some covers, particularly in my head at the moment, thinking about mustard seed, which is a very cheap seed for using as a cover crop, can have a significant positive effect as far as things like potato cyst nematode is concerned. So there may be some things which you can plant which will have a monetary advantage without necessarily putting cash in the bank. The caveat there, however, is that you do need to be you need to consider what else is in a crop rotation and what's coming next. So if I come back to my discussion there about mustard, mustard also supports sclerotinia. So if you've got oilseed rape in the rotation, having mustard as a cover crop is a big no-no. Probably having brassicas as cover crops is probably not a good idea for the same reason. Some of the brassicas claim to have no clubroot and sclerotinia problems. They're all brassicas. It's pretty hard to see how that actually works. And so for me, I would, with oilseed rape in the rotation, I steer clear of brassicas unless they are part of that oilseed rape. So in the photograph you've just seen, that's brassicas in there. Two fields to the left of that are both oilseed rape, and so I've gone with having the brassicas in there actually for an experiment, but that's another story. So here's a video of my aches mix. You'll see Phacelia in here. You'll see crimson clover in here. The red stem crop is buckwheat. You'll also see floor sweepings in the way of oats, and that it's only a little clip, I know, but it just gives you a feeling of the differences. So you've obviously got different heights there. You've got potential issues with crops going to seed, which has to be dealt with and thought about. but they're going to have a massive diversity of species in there, which is obviously good news for yeah, everything. If we just now look at the end game for a cover or agreement crop, we've talked a little bit about the use of a cover crop. What are we going to use? So we can leave it for the slugs. Now I have, it's widely publicised that I've got lots of slug problems here at Sweetup, and on your right is a little picture of a black oat and Phacelia. It's quite a popular mix. The black oat and the Phacelia are both good for soil biology, good for soil health, but they seem to be pretty popular with slugs too. My timing of sowing that particular crop was a bit late. It was 2 autumns ago, and I struggled to keep that alive with slug, and I needed to go with slug pellets. And that's another important point about a cover crop. You can't just chuck it in the ground and think it's going to happen. You do need to monitor it. So another option is graze it with livestock, or in the case of this particular brassica, you can see that the slugs are enjoying this one as well. But grazing it with livestock is one of the ways of crop destruction. We can also let the frost kill it off. So if you've got buckwheat and some of the susceptible brassicas that are susceptible to frost, some of the clovers, Bursian clover, Parisian clover is another one, which are susceptible to frost, and you're in a part of the world which gets decent frosts, then clearly frost is an option too. We can incorporate it with or without spraying it off as another option, and that incorporation, you know, it might be a cultivator, it might be a plough, it just may be a direct drill, and in fact, the latter is what I use. So, as a quick summary, there, we if my experience of green covers or green crops is all about thinking about what benefit I can get out of it, how I can fit it into my system, and then considering the other things about what I'm going to sow, what time of year it's going to be, what I'm going to be able to do to get an income from it, if there is an income to be had, what long-term benefits is it going to give to me with my soils and things. So that's what is the biggest picture is all about. And my little next GIF here is any questions, but we're going to take questions at the end if that's okay. Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks very much, David. Yeah, as he said, if anyone does have any questions, can you please keep them until we've had both speakers? That would be much appreciated. If David can stop sharing his screen, we'll just get moved over to William Fleming from Germinal.
Right, that's great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn, and thank you for inviting me along this evening. As Lynn said, my name is William Fleming. I work for Germinal, and a lot of what David has went through there, I think a lot of the principles apply both on the arable side and on the livestock side. And as grass breeders and wholesalers, we breed a lot of the grasses, we wholesale them, we mix them. This is our facility in Lincoln where we clean and mix all of our seeds. But we do not sell direct to farms. So a lot of you probably won't know who we are and have never heard of us. But that's because we work with the merchants. But if you have bought grass seed or clover and it has any of varieties in it that are prefixed by Aber, then they have originated with us. So tonight, my slant is very much focused on the livestock side because that's both where, as a company, we are focused heavily on, and also where my background is as well. Now, very briefly, what is the background to all these multi-species swards? Well, I don't like to sound old, I probably am, but we're actually not reinventing the wheel here. When you look at seed mixtures from the 1940s and 1950s, a lot of the crops and the species that I'm going to speak about in the next 5 or 10 minutes were all in those mixtures. And we're just coming back to realising the benefits of it. And both as a company ourselves and looking at wider research, we're beginning to see the benefits and where they can fit into a more productively sustainable system for agriculture. And given the changes to greening and eats in Scotland that David mentioned, this is never going to be more pertinent than now as we move into the next year and the launch of these schemes. So, what is a multi-species? Basically, if you take one of the species from the grasses, the legumes, and the herbs, you have a multi-species mix. The middle boxes are there with the perennial ryegrass, the white clover, and the plantain. That box I'm not going to speak about tonight because those are the species within each of the subsections there that we know most about. They are reliable in probably 98% of circumstances, and they are the backbone and the basis of everything that we really try to do and build upon. I want to go through some of the other species below that tonight and say a few words about them because they are more specialist and they're more site specific and end use specific to what you want to achieve within them. So cracking on, cocksfoot's the first one. Any of you that are old enough to have had grass cuts, it's a cocksfoot plant that's caused it. That's because there's a lot of silica hairs on the backs of the leaves of a cocksfoot plant. Cocksfoot, very, very versatile plant. It will grow in a wide range of circumstances, but the big downfall to it is it gets stalk rejected as it becomes more mature. It's those silica hairs. And if you ever watch cows grazing, they wrap their tongue around about the grass. Well, if they wrap their tongue around about grass with cocksfoot in it, they get their tongue jabbed with these silica hairs and they reject it. And that's when it becomes clumpy and unpalatable. So to get the best out of cocksfoot, you need to graze it really hard and keep it very young. But it is a useful addition to some of the mixes depending on the circumstances, particularly dry land situations. Moving on to the fescues. This is one of the widest species of grass worldwide. There are over 300 different members of the Festuca family. They range from very specific fine lawn types to the Atlas fescues that grow in the Atlas Mountains of North Africa. Here in the UK, the main ones that we use are meadow fescue, tall fescue, and sheep's fescue. These are all lower yielding than the base perennial ryegrass that we use, but they have quite a reasonable ME, not as good as perennial ryegrass, but they are still a very useful grass, but they are slower to establish in a mix. So be wary and be careful what you do when you're thinking about them. Moving on to some of the herbs. Yarrow. Now, yarrow tends to be suited to poorer soils. It is very deep rooted, excuse me, but it is very unpredictable. We have had it, and you'll see it in the results in a minute or two. We've had it in mixtures at our Horizon Wiltshire site on trial, and we've had 3 years when we have had no yarrow appear, and then in the 4th year we have had a massive yarrow. So it's unpredictable in terms of how it's going to grow, when it's going to grow. The other thing about it is it's a very, very small seed, approximately about 9.5 million seeds per kilogram. So in any mix, you don't want to be including any more than about 100 grams to the acre. Burnet. Now, Burnet is one of the faster establishing and more competitive of the herbs, relatively speaking. It again has a deep tap root. Tap root goes down to about 1.5 meters. It doesn't like wet soils. It prefers freer draining soils and not standing with its feet wet. If it's got that sort of situation, it will continue to grow all year round, and it does well in some of the lower fertility, lower pH soils that we can have and encounter. Sheep's parsley. This is probably one of the go-to ones that I would go to in a mix if I was adding anything from that bottom set of boxes. It again has a taproot, very palatable. It's naturally high in iron and also vitamins A and C. There are claims about its medicinal purposes. We wouldn't dare get involved in that because they are you need an awful lot of the plant, and we're not going to have a lot of these species within our herbal leys as we go forward. They're there, part of the inclusion, they're part of the mix, but they're not something I would count on. Moving on to the legumes, bird's foot trefoil. Now this, when you look at it on paper, you would think is one of the most fantastic legumes that we can have. It's got a tap root, but it also has lateral roots below the surface, and it grows a bigger root biomass than any of the other legumes. And it's suited to a wide range of soils, moderate, low to moderate fertility with pHs between 5.5 and 7.5. But, and this is the big but, it does not stand hard, heavy grazing. Excuse me, you need to keep green leaf on the plant all the time to keep it photosynthesizing. And to get the best out of the plant and any potential for it to persist, you have to rest it between early September and mid-October to allow the photosynthesis to get down to the roots and build energy in the roots for the winter period. But that's not a time of year when most of us have surplus grass about. Grass is beginning to slow down at that time of year, and we need all the land we've got to cover ourselves. Now, black medic, this is one that we see talked about quite a lot, but it is at best a biannual legume. It's a biannual if you get it sown in the spring in nice warm soils to get it established for that first winter. If you sow it in the autumn, first winter, and struggles, and in the second year you'll have a lower plant count in amongst it. But it is a very palatable plant and a very protein-rich legume there as well. But it prefers to grow on lighter, free and draining soils, preferably on relatively fertile soils. David mentioned and showed a picture including some crimson clover there. That's one of the few times I've seen crimson clover utilised in a mix, if I'm being honest. Normally, where we see crimson clover being used is it's used as a nurse crop for organic grass reseeds. It's very quick to establish, and in a pure stand, we'll get about 4 tons of dry matter per hectare for it, as long as you sow it in a nice warm seed bed in the spring. It tends to be then cut along with that grass reseed in below, which helps to get rid of the annual weeds, and you produce yourself a nice, relatively high protein silage from your reseed in an organic situation, which tends to be one of the challenges in organics is getting enough protein into the rations. Vetches, I didn't see David mention vetch in his mix there. We see a lot of vetches going out for cover crops. If you're going to have them as a cover crop, you're better to use a winter vetch, which gives you the frost tolerance. They are a very big seed, so we need about 30 to 35 kilograms per acre if you're sowing it on its own, and 48 kilograms if you're sowing it as a companion crop along with other grasses, for example. And depending on the time when you cut the vetch, you can be looking to get anywhere in the region around about 20% protein from the vetch and the companion grasses that you sow with it. That's the caveat there is you need to do a wet chemistry to get a true reflection of the protein content. NIRS doesn't give you a good enough reflection of the true protein that's there. Some of you will see in some of the mixes that are out and about, there's a lucerne included in them. An absolutely fantastic legume. I'm not going to say a lot about it, except to say that it is a challenging plant to establish, particularly here in Scotland, because we need to have very free draining soils and pHs up round about 6.5 and above. And we need to use inoculated seed if you're going to have any chance of getting lucerne to establish and prevail. But it needs to be on very, very free draining soils within the Scottish area and up here. And the last plant I want to mention, which is in a lot of cover herbal ley mixes, is sainfoin. Sainfoin is absolutely brilliant on the Cotswolds and Cotswold brash land. Again, it needs that high pH, 6.5 plus, and P and K indexes over 2. The challenge with it is it doesn't like get its feet wet, and it's very slow to establish. So if you're establishing it in a herbal ley with perennial ryegrass and white clovers, you won't get it to establish. We have had no success getting it to establish in these types of mixes because the other species are far too competitive there. I'm giving you a very quick run through of some of the species, the secondary species that are included in some of the herbal leys. I've tried to give you the pros and the cons and things to think about. And I'm going to move on and talk about some of the trial work and how it impacts on livestock performance at the end. Now, in 2019, as a company, there was a lot of interest in herbal leys, so we decided to set up a trial. Very quickly, that is just 4 of the mixes. We had a monoculture of perennial ryegrass and a perennial ryegrass and white clover one. I can send these slides to anybody later on if they wish, but just look at that, the 16 component mix. And remember the fact that that mix there has the smallest amount total of grass and by far and away the least perennial ryegrass in it. And you'll see why I'm emphasising that just now. This is the yields that were taken. All of these mixes were harvested with a hull drop plot harvester. And across the 4 years that we've got results for there, anything other than a monoculture, sorry, yielded better. Regardless of the season, you had more kilos of dry matter from a diverse mix than you did from the monoculture. But look at that diverse mix at the end. That's the one that had the smallest amount of grass in it and by far and away the least perennial ryegrass in it. And you've got beyond the point of the optimum point and you're into diminishing returns. You're adding more species, but you're not benefiting in terms of the kilograms of dry matter that you're producing. And I'm going to move on now. That's the yield thing. The other thing that we talk about a lot and we see mentioned a lot when we're talking about herbal leys is how they change. I have a couple of slides here. This is the very basic multi-species with the 2 grasses, the 2 main white clovers, and the 2 main herbs that we would use. The herbs are the kind of purple lilac, the legumes are the blues, and the grasses are the greens. Now this is in year 1. Now look at the difference in terms of the proportions in those same plots the time you get to the end cut 4 in 2023. There's a huge variation in the how the different plants grow, when they grow at different times of year, within years and between years. So it makes it a bit more challenging for having an idea of how you're going to ration livestock that are grazing these types of mixes. But they are a very, very good tool in terms of improving livestock performance and helping you to get through dry periods and droughty periods. Now, some of the other work that was done, this is work that was done by Professor Tommy Boland at University College Dublin, and we had a wee bit of an input and involvement with it. This trial was done with ewes nursing twin lambs. The ewes were all lambed inside, and as they went out, they were ewes nursing twins went out onto one of these 4 mixes to see how the ewes and lambs performed. And from memory, I think they were at 12 ewes and lambs per hectare stocking density. As you can see there, anything other than the monoculture perennial ryegrass had an improvement in lamb performance and lamb weaning weights, with the best return being the 6 species mix, being 2.4 kilograms more than the perennial ryegrass. Now that 6 species mix is the same as the pie charts that I just showed you and how they changed. Perennial ryegrass, timothy, white and red clover, chicory and plantain. And then the 9 species mix, when we're seeing a drop off again, that had those same 6 species, but the inclusion then was of cocksfoot, birchfoot, trefoil, and yarrow. So you can see that we're getting a benefit in terms of livestock performance by going to these more multi-species lays. Now that impact was carried on after the lambs were weaned. They stayed on the same plots that they were on, or the same species that they were on. And again, you can see the perennial ryegrass days to slaughter was over 180 of 182. And everything else, the lambs were ready for slaughter 14 days earlier. So by feeding the lambs on this multi-species swards, we actually reduce the carbon footprint of the lamb that we're producing because the lambs are with us for less time, so we're getting less methane produced, and this is a knock-on effect of reducing the CO2 equivalents of the lamb, the meat that you're producing from it. And finally, one of the last things about the benefits of the multi-species was it halved the amount of anthelmintic treatments that the lambs received. Now, these anthelmintic treatments were done on fecal egg counts, and the threshold was 400 eggs in a gram and over. They were then treated. So if we can halve the anthelmintic usage, A, we're saving money, and B, as a livestock industry, there is an issue with anthelmintic resistance. And if we can halve the treatments, then hopefully we're going to get more and a longer use out of the anthelmintics that we do have. So just to summarise, the first thing really want to say is that if you're going to go down the route of getting involved with the EECs and including the herbal Leys in it, you have to start with a weed-free field. There is no chemistry available currently to clean out the weeds, the docks, the thistles, the nettles that won't take out the herbs and more than likely take out all the legumes as well. Understand what you're trying to achieve. David hit the nail on the head very, very succinctly earlier on when he said, you're not doing it for ticking a box, he's doing it for the other benefits. And that's the same with, with the herbal Leys. Think about what you're trying to achieve. Speak to your seed merchant and get him to advise you, because there's a very complex interaction between the plants in the mix, the types of soil that they're on and how they react and how they grow within that soil type, and the management that you're going to have involved in it. And lastly, these herbal Leys, they have the potential to improve the gross margins and your carbon footprint. So they are very much something to think about, something to be used as a tool in your armoury, in the EECs, but also as the drive towards sustainable production going forward.
I actually had a wee question for you, David. You mentioned that you were doing some trading with your carbon credits. There's obviously going to be more people this year that are going to have to do greening. Is that something that people can still get themselves signed into, or is that a kind of closed scheme?
So hopefully you can hear me and my video won't disappear at the same time.
Yeah, no, I can
The
hear you.
carbon credit trading that I'm doing is with a company called Soil Capital, and that's
Right.
about the change of practice. So by going into doing cover crops, you will get some credits developed or produced for the change in practice over what you used to do, and that's worth money. I mean,
Right.
my total carbon credit trading in a year is worth about 12 grand to me. So it's quite significant and clearly does things like covering the cost of seed.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. Would either of you have any advice for anyone that's oh, sorry, I think we've got a wee question here. So there's a question here saying, what is the best species to add to existing permanent grass for sheep in Aberdeenshire?
Oh, if I'm being honest, Lynn, I was waiting on that question coming up on a regular basis.
Exactly.
Getting some of the herbs to establish into permanent grass is a challenge. We have had seen very mixed results doing it. The big thing is what you do with that permanent pasture before you try to sow these herbs into it. We're looking at very small seeds. They are slow to establish. You have to get that permanent pasture eaten really tightly down. And if there's any kind of dead, decaying, thatchy material in at the bottom of it, I would always suggest that it's worthwhile going in with a like a tine harrow, like the kind of a Pico type, pine box type tine harrow, and ripping out that thatch at the bottom. Because the crucial thing is seed to soil contact. Once you get that thatch ripped out, then you have you have the potential to get some of the herbs established. My go-to in that situation would tend to be plantain. I find it a very reliable herb once you get it established, but it's still a challenge to get it established. Get the thatch ripped out so you can see it. One old farmer who'd been involved in this sort of thing a long time ago told me, he says, you harrow the field until your neighbours think, what on earth's he playing at? Because you've got the field brown and you've got rid of all the thatch at the bottom of it. Then you get your herb seed and broadcast in and rolled in. My preference is always to try and put a little bit of prill lime on the surface at the same time. And the reason for that is that old thatching material at the bottom is decaying material. And as it decays, it acidifies. So the last thing you want is a very young, tender seedling to come up and be scorched by the acidic layer that's on the surface. So the prill lime helps to neutralize that, and it gives a wee boost to help the seedling get established. The other thing I would suggest, and it's more difficult, is that you need, after you have sown it and rolled it in, you need to keep that grass eaten and kept really tight down. Because the important thing for these young seedlings when they establish is they need to get their leaves up and photosynthesize so as they get energy to establish. There's a small seed, so they have a very, very limited amount of energy in the seed to establish. They need to get a leaf up and photosynthesize. So you have to try and keep it grazed down. And as soon as you see the new herbs establishing, then you take the sheep off the field. And don't put any fertilizer on it apart from like a starter fertilizer with P and K. You don't want any nitrogen there because that way the nitrogen will encourage the grass to get away and shade out the herbs that you're trying to establish. It's a challenge, but that would be my take on doing it going for at any time.
No worries. I think there's a wee follow-on question just from that there, and it's what's the best way to get a weed-free bed when establishing herbal leys? Some years I can have no weeds, and the next time the bed is full of weeds. Seeds are sown in generally good conditions.
The problem is you probably need to start at least 2 to 3 years in advance. And with the change in eeks, we're not going to have that time period and lead period to do it. You need to control these weeds a couple, 2, 3 years in advance before you're ready to reseed it, so that you've got a clean seed bed. And that's only a clean seed bed on the surface. If you direct drill it, as soon as you put a plough in it and turn it over, which is still a great way of establishing a reseed in the right circumstances or the required circumstances, but as soon as you turn it over, you're bringing up the weed seed bank to the surface, and you're giving it the perfect opportunity for those weeds to establish at the same time as your grass because they've got moisture, they've got heat, they've got light. You're bringing them to the surface. So if you've got a really dirty field, and I'm not an agronomist, my take would be you have to start a couple of years in advance to get rid of the weeds, and then it's probably better if, as long as there's no compaction issues in the field, to destroy the existing sward either by spraying whatever method, getting rid of it and direct drilling because you know that in that couple of 2 or 3 centimeters in the top, you've got rid of the weed seed there. As soon as you go in with a plough, you're bringing the stuff that's buried to the surface. I know I'm maybe not very helpful, but I'm trying.
No, that was great. Thank you. There is another wee question here regarding the herbal leys as well. So, a question's come through just to say, why is there a drop-off in lamb performance with more species in the swards?
The reason for that, Well, we don't have a scientific reason to that. I have my own opinion on that, and a lot of this stuff is still opinion. But the reason for that is when you have in a seed mixture, you've only a limited amount of seeds you can put in there that's going to establish. So when you reduce the high ME perennial ryegrass to bring in cocksfoot, which has naturally got a lower digestibility and a lower ME than the perennial ryegrass, you're reducing the um, the energy content and energy density of every bite that that lamb takes. So by reducing that, you're reducing performance. Where the six species one had a predominance of perennial ryegrass, it had Timothy in it. Timothy's got a higher D value than cocksfoot. So you're although you're diluting the performance, you're not diluting it as much, and that is compensated for by the extra energy and protein that's coming from the chicory and the plantain, and that compensates for that along with the red clover. So you're reducing these productive species to bring in other things which may have a benefit in certain circumstances, but not for livestock performance. Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, I would just like to say a thank you to both of our speakers tonight, William and David. It's been great to hear what you've got to say about the upcoming changes. Good to know that we've got some good people on standby for when everything all happens and we can ask questions. But thank you very much for attending tonight, and I hope you've all got the answers to the questions that you were looking for. So thank you very much for joining on tonight. See you later.